time being by ourselves. It's totally, I'm good with it. But if you are tuning in, this is Remotely Interesting number 13. This is talking about peak FOMO. This
Where's
is
your
the,
finger count?
what's that?
Where's your finger count?
Oh, wait. Yeah, you're right. I got it to the tradition. Sorry, I was thrown off. So it's Remotely Interesting number, boom, 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 13. We're talking about the global virtual design sprint that just happened, and we're titling it as Peak FOMO, or Fear of Missing Out. And the reason why is because we've had a ton of people that in midstream were wondering if they should join, not join. They were wondering, is it going to happen again? I mean, half of the messages that I get now are all about what's going to happen between now and October, and I do have plans for that. But yeah, I really wanted to make the show about both of us to just talk about our impressions of what happened at the event. Because you're the two-time most valuable practitioner, you've been closest to this from the very beginning, and you had to take a step back because you were busy and you had other things that were going on. But you, of all people, are a great kind of counter to me being in the thick of things, for you looking at it objectively from your point of view to see what has happened. Now, for those of you who don't know the person I'm talking to, shame on you, because you should know by now. But in case you don't, I'd like to introduce you to Sandy Lam. She is a Red Dot award-winning product designer, innovation sprint facilitator, and currently the design system lead at Software AG. She has studied and worked in several countries. Knowing and experiencing the different cultures has cultivated her interest in juxtaposing ideas and work with global teams effectively. One of her main focus is designing workshops and facilitating collaboration to solve problems creatively, but with structure. How does that sound to you, Sandy?
Sounds like you're reading from anywhere.
Well, I wanted to see if the copy made sense to you, because this is what people may encounter someday when it's put on, say, like a LinkedIn profile. Right. So I wanted to read it back to you in a way that made sense.
Sounds good to me. Curious what the audience thought about it.
Is there anything you would add or not add? Put it in the comments, please. Sandy would need the feedback.
Put it in the comment below.
Yes, put it so we can instant feedback. It's like, it's great. It's like, I don't know who that is. That doesn't sound like Sandy. So, okay, let's get this show on the road for people who have been patiently waiting. So I want to start this conversation, Sandy, by let's focus on your perspective of GVDS4. You can talk about the setup, you can talk about the teams, tell me how your experience was with some of the sprints that you were on. I'd be really curious to know what your takeaway was, what your main takeaway was from the entire event, and some of the impressions it left upon you.
So at GVDS4, I take a very different seat this time. In the last two GVDS, I always facilitated, and this time around, I decided to take the back seat and be a normal participant and not just want to learn. Actually, the main reason was because I thought that I had been facilitating, and that was just one of the facilitation style. So this time around, I thought I wanted to learn from other people how they facilitate and see the difference myself. And actually, I have learned a lot, and I was pretty right about it. So every design sprint, depending on the facilitator, it went in a little bit different vibe, like a different atmosphere. Some are more outcome driven in a way, and some was more learning driven, and some were more just focusing on collaboration. And that was quite interesting, because I just observing that, it made me feel like actually this was mainly because of the facilitator, how she or he was kind of forming the team or helping the team to collaborate in a way. And just because of the different facilitation style, it actually changed the atmosphere in the team quite a lot, I feel like. So that was quite interesting. Yeah, what was the other question that you had?
So from what I heard so far is that you're saying that the facilitator really dictated the overall feel of the sprint for the week in terms of their style, their approach.
Yeah.
I guess
mean, like, of course, the different team members also would make a difference. But I think the facilitator, because you are the, how do we put it? Like, typically we say like the facilitator is the glue of a team. And I think because of that, it has a lot to do with how the facilitator engage the participants. So like for some cases, maybe the facilitator like to be more relaxed and not talk too much, except about the process or about the like what is going on in the design sprint. But some facilitator actually likes to drive more conversation outside design sprint. So they would talk about, like, I've seen like people sending pictures, like for example, Lisa's group, I see them sending pictures saying good mornings to each other, especially cool when you're working in a remote global team where like in the morning, someone is saying, hey, good morning, and then sending a scenery where they are walking in the farm, and then the next you can see a picture of people like having like city high-rise buildings around, and that is pretty cool. Like you can get a different feel that way. But like it depends on the facilitator. I think that actually has, I mean, it's not 100% depending on the facilitator, but I think it has a lot to do with it.
They influence the team and the vibe of the entire session in a big way. But it's counterbalanced by people that A, recognize the role and what they're doing, and B, the overall experience of the team. So Taco Cat was one team that was just, there's always, every GVDS, there's like a handful of teams where you look at the lineup and it's like the 1984 All-Star basketball game for the Olympics, where you just have the who's who of the basketball world playing and just dominating every team. There are 4 or 5 teams that arguably have like some of the best top talent in virtual design sprints and facilitation, and in respective in their fields, they're and arguably towards the top tier. And when you get them all together in the same space, they not only know how to play well with one another, but they also know how to draw the strengths. Usually they know how to draw the strengths of one another in the same space. So yeah, it's interesting to think about how the facilitator role works with this, because sometimes a facilitator may take things that are counter to the spirit of the event, where they'll say, for example, they're so experienced that they kind of want to do things their way. They basically know that they want to go about something in a particular fashion, so they want to go that route, and people usually go along with it. But I think it's important to recognize when that happens and to give clearance for that and a space for it when people decide to do it. Hang on, my consultant's coming. Hi. You need to show me your work? Okay. This is A and A. It needs to be A and D here.
He's gone.
Oh, he's getting his pencil.
Okay.
Yep. You need a page of cursive, correct?
I did that.
Okay. Yeah, just correct that D.
And then I'm done.
You're good to go. Then you got 20 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, you have 20 minutes, but then, yeah, you'll have to separate yourself from that. Okay?
And then I get 20 more minutes.
Well, no, after that, you have to go down for lunch.
Okay.
Okay? You forgetting where it was? It's right. Okay, go. And then I'll check your schoolwork later on. Okay? It's recreational screen time over here. So, yeah, that's my take, is that the last event, we had facilitators kind of playing within a certain boundary. They kind of respected that boundary. This time around, for people that have been through this multiple times, there was a clear kind of break from that, and people wanting to kind of fashion the engagement in a way that made sense for them and continue to experiment. I think for the next time, I'm going to have to put a sandbox for that experience to say, like, if you want a very, very experienced facilitator, a very experienced person who's knows the challenge, knows what they want, this is what to expect. Like, set the expectations up front that this is what you'll probably run into. And I think that's probably needed so that people coming to the event don't have the idea that everything is going to be on the same level, because it clearly isn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think there's a way to actually match people from with the right or their preferred facilitation style?
I was thinking about that when you were talking about that. Like, is as a person who organizes people and teams, what if I put in the extra dynamic of asking for, like, what kind of facilitator do you want? And it's the debate between asking about whether or not you want an experienced facilitator, because most people will just say, I want experienced, because they want to get that experience, to personality style or approach. Do you like a facilitator who's execution driven? Do you like somebody who's very touchy-feely and likes to get a lot of, not touchy-feely through the screen, but just basically to be very respectful of feelings and perspective, and likes discussion, and likes that space to get understanding, which some people appreciate? Or do you want a facilitator that's very about data, very data driven, and wants to have a very their approach is to get as much information into the team as possible to get proper data so that things are framed appropriately? My instinct is kind of go towards that route, and I don't mind the complexity of trying to figure that out. But that also means that I'm now putting a definition on facilitator. So I'm attempting to put them into a certain bucket, and I don't know if that's wise yet, because facilitators, like everyone, like people, are going to change over time. They may be one way for one event, but they may be switching to something else later on.
But what if it's not you framing or naming the facilitator's style, but rather get the facilitator, when they sign up, ask them, what is your general way of facilitating?
Basically they'd write a paragraph out saying that this is the way I tend to facilitate, and then people can put that into the equation as to what they want to sign up if they self-select.
Yeah, because I would know, like, because based on feedback people given to me anyway, I know that, like, when I facilitate, I'm very structured in a way, and that matches my bio as well. Like, I like to put things in more structured format, and pretty much I mean, I do also experiments and all that, but even when I experiment things, I like to put them in structured, so that I can already tell, like, what is my facilitation style in a way. So I think most facilitators would know.
Here's the question I have for you. I decided to try and do 3 straight weeks of sprinting, which was a mistake. People got burned out after week 1. Extraordinarily, so this particular GVDS saw a new dynamic where people no longer, for the most part, I'd say about half, did not adhere to the 1-week framework. They blew that out and met for an iteration sprint. Some people carried it 3 weeks. Some people invented their own process, and it became this wonderful, messy dynamic. But it clearly broke the model that I thought was something that people wanted to do, where it was very regimented, very structured, very like, okay, you're out this week, there's a new people coming in. No, I think it's because of the pandemic or not, that this dynamic of continuing on the conversation about what they were doing persisted. So let me get back to the original question. I had set up in week 1, I had done all of the organizing in terms of getting the teams together based on schedule and interest, and also with roles and everything else. So I did what I normally do best and organize. And I put teams in that for that first week where they're available, where they seem to make sense. The last week, week 3, I did less of that. And instead I made that challenge and person driven, so that people could sign up and use free will to assign themselves where they needed to be, and only posted the schedule based on what the facilitator was doing. Both seem to work. But what I would like to know from your perspective is, when is it more appropriate to do the week 1 style versus the week 3 style?
Perhaps you can actually ask the people when they sign up, because I don't know, like for me, I can already tell you that I do actually prefer to have the like the ability to sign up for different teams every single week, because one of my the purpose of joining GVDS is to network and also learn from other people. And that if I am allowed to, or if I could change teams, that actually gives me more opportunities to learn from different people and learn about other ways of working. I like the dynamics that way. But I know that a lot of teams, like we can actually see how it was working GVDS for a lot of teams actually stick together because they found the team actually work really well, or perhaps they just liked the challenge or the result or the outcome, and then they want to drive it even further forward. And those teams, they just stick together for the last 3 weeks or so, and it worked really well. So I think different people have different preference, and maybe it's just a question that we need to ask them when people sign up for it, and see if they actually prefer a 3-week kind of design sprint with the iteration and ongoing process, or if they prefer to switch teams every single week.
Maybe it can be both. So here's what I'm thinking. The next one is going to be from October 5th to November 5th. It's going to be a full freaking month. I'm making it like, that's not 3 weeks. It's going to be a hybrid. But this, what it's going to be is that the second week is going to be the official sprint week. So not week 1, week 2. So week 1 is kind of like a gathering. People that want to do a lot of data and research, they can, a lot of rigor, problem framing, they can self-assemble around that. But week 2 would be the official week where it is a full assembly of design teams that is assembled just like I did week 1 based on scheduling. The reason why I value that is because when I didn't do that, week 2 and week 3 had this boat of people that didn't have a team but wanted to sprint. And I was obliged to start a sprint up as a facilitator on both weeks to accommodate that need. So I had to get out of being the organizer of the event and actually be a facilitator for a team. Not that I didn't mind it. I mean, I love going through the motions, and I was doing prototyping anyway, so I was in my element. But without that structure and looking at the data and seeing where people can get together and functionally make things happen, I was brought back again into the mix to be the fault line, the thing that where I can't let people who spent money suddenly have no team and wonder what the hell they're doing. So week 1 was better for that. Week 3, since week 1 was in the back pocket and people may have had experience, the majority did, people who came on late were now able to, as long as there was a time frame that worked for them, so the time was important, whether it was midnight to 3 a.m., 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., there was something for everyone internationally that fit for their schedule. And they could modify and bend if they were the outlier for a particular team. But as long as I had time coverage, people would self-assemble and go with certain people. Sometimes people had to cut things off because there was too much interest in what somebody was doing.
True.
So I think that if that GVDS 5 is the second week is the structure sprint, but week 3 is the iterative sprints, and people, whatever people want to do, but week 4 is the experimental open session, sign up for something, propose something, kind of marketplace of ideas kind of approach. I think that there's just enough like decompression time between week 2 and week 4 that probably would work better, so that you don't have this compressed schedule like I tried to do this time around.
But sometimes the teams also run over. So I think it has to do with like people's availabilities and stuff like that. But sometimes when we say 1 week of sprint, it actually runs over like 1.5 weeks or something. Yeah. And if we pack things like so tight, then I think it creates extra stress for those teams, and they make them feel like, oh, they are missing out or something because they need to continue finishing the current sprint.
The other dynamic also is that we had people join in late. So we had people coming in week 2 and week 3 that weren't available week 1. And some people didn't find out about the event and said, can I do a single week for week 3? We had 4 people that signed up, but there were about 10 people that inquired, where it's like, I really, really, really want to do this. And I said, okay, it's not the full amount. It's like, if you're just doing 1 week, it's this price. And I would be responsible for finding a team that works for your schedule. So I did the organization bit and kind of handling that on the back end. I think 2 weeks is a reasonable amount of time to extend a sprint. And if people are very, if people are very motivated and intrinsically motivated and interested in what they did in week 2, then I can easily see them saying, you know, I don't need to be in week 4. I'm in my element with this. And we have something good going here and want to continue with it. So if there's that subset of people that want to do that, then I'm not going to force them to go into week 4. It's just telling me if you have the time or don't have the time. And maybe you just want to observe a team and see what happens, and you just don't get involved, but you track it. I think that's a good compromise between having just 1 week and then 3 weeks out, and then losing the momentum of that 1 week. I think there's enough gap between week 2 and week 4 to make that work.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I think sometimes people also have problems with observers. And I don't exactly know what is the best solution for that.
Can you elaborate that? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Because like we actually in GVDS, we really like to encourage the environments that people can learn from each other and make it as open as possible. But I know that in some sprints, the teams feel like, especially depends on the observer as well. So some observers, they like to get on Zoom, or they just go there, but then they turn off their camera and not speaking, and then makes the team feel uncomfortable in a way, like having someone not even knowing if that person is there, because like no interaction. And in some cases, the observer suddenly wants to participate, like it would give comments and stuff like that, and it also throws the team off a bit. In some cases also, like maybe the observer suddenly voted on something, you know, and I mean, it's not going to change a lot for the team's results because it's just one person, for example, but then still like some teams may not like it and they find it a little bit disturbing in a way. That, because, you know, design sprint is very, the teams are very in a tight schedule, and sometimes they may not like that. Some really like it though. I think it really depends on the group. So
it could boil down to team norms and rules. So it may be a matter of saying, okay, what does the facilitator want to do in terms of engagement? Because there are some facilitators that, to your point, are very wary of observers because of previous experiences. For example, I heard from one that was very vocal, saying that they did not want a particular person to be a part of their observation because that individual would put on that advisor hat and put in unsolicited advice to people within a session as well as within the Slack channel. The person that gave the advice was, you know, they meant the best. They did it. They didn't do it to circumvent anyone, but the facilitator clearly felt that they didn't have control of their group at all. They didn't have control of the narrative. They felt like they were speaking to two different people. So I think it's going to come down to talking to the facilitator to see what makes sense for observing. Like, you can observe, but here's the mode of engagement that is acceptable. Like, you can observe the Slack channel, but you cannot join the meetings. Or if you join the meetings, you have to have your video on and present. And if that's not possible, then we'll have the recordings up later in case you want to catch up. So it may fall back to having those team rules and norms kind of established, where we have a default set, but then they add to them. It's like, what would you like to do from observers? In fact, I almost feel like this should be something where I can create something in type form, where it can build something for people, where it goes, okay, let's create some facilitator rules and norms that you want to engage the team with, so they don't have to write them from scratch. and just go through a checklist of like, okay, what would you like to do with observers? What makes sense for you? And based on those choices, I can have Typeform write out an entire like page that gets somehow, I can use probably Zapier and port it into a document so that they can easily like just basically refer to that as like their team doc and do it that way, so that they are doing it still within the confines of what the GVDS assumes as a event, but they can write the script on what makes sense. And then they can still have the team rules and norms as part of the team canvas if they want to go down that route.
Yeah, that makes sense. But maybe perhaps we just have to get the GVDS on air going. Then we just we just point everyone to the YouTube instead of having them actually in the call.
Yeah, that's, see, now here's where here's where I throw something, caution to the wind, and I say, look, you run with this and see what happens. It is nervous. It's very, very nervous. It's nerving, but I know that it has to be done. Because the minute I start thinking that I have a sense of control about this, where I can dictate how the engagement is the minute I start losing people. I have to obviously protect the community from things like commercialization, of exploitation of like name and who they are, because there will be that. I don't like the idea of taking the community and basically trying to monetize it. The reason why I charged in the first place was to make it palpable for my family to do, and that it wasn't an expensive hobby. So I get that when I start mixing in commerce with this, it's going to start bringing in some things like, people wanting to do partnerships and things like that. And I get that, but there's always a negotiation that comes with it. So I with the GVDS on air thing, I can see where this could go. And I know that the people involved can kind of take it to a level where it's like, it's a beast in and of itself. Like Jerome did an amazing job in 3 and also arguably with 4. 3 was just this masterpiece of like all these different things that had happened. It was literally a history of what had happened with that event. So where the on air goes is going to be interesting. If I were to place my bets now, I almost think that it's not going to be called GVDS on air by the time it rolls out in October. I think it's going to be something different. I think it may serve like an entirely different audience, but it just, GVDS is one dimension of it. That's just me like not knowing all the details that have been discussed so far, but it feels like it could go there. Like if it evolved the way it did and people start understanding how to basically do more DTC content, like direct to consumer, and opening up the avenue so that really now it's the community that can basically showcase what they're all about. And it's not just about the event. That would be interesting. But again, it depends on the people and the personnel involved. I'll make one more comment that the thing I'm being very careful about and I'm watching out for is when people start feeling entitled. We spoke about this offline. I've been organizing enough, I've been part of organizing groups for organizations and starting these kinds of communities for various different types of nonprofits and for companies. I mean, it goes back way back in my teenage years and when I was in college. I mean, I was organizing left and right, so this is nothing new. The one thing that I've had that has been frequent that I've seen happen where things start to go downhill is when people feel like they're entitled to something. And it's a slippery slope, because if you start building fences around things thinking that this is your territory, that's usually the start of a really slow, slippery slide into us versus them. And I'm being very wary of that. That hasn't happened with GVDS yet. It hasn't happened, but when I start seeing things start getting in that realm, that's when I'm going to start to go, okay, then we need to shift. So part of my reason for GVDS 5 being the last of this series and rebooting it for next year is anticipating the market changing, but also knowing that I'm going to be continuing doing virtual sprints as long as there's a need and an interest to do so, but I'm clearly getting into more of the prototyping realm, the proving it out through desirability, testing markets for ideas, so that doing design sprints has more rationale and more foundation work to it. So I'll get off my soapbox because I realize I just went off my head. So go
Does
ahead.
it turn it into not a design sprint anymore?
Yeah, I think what it does is that it pairs it. So part of what I'm doing with the dash is kind of bringing the two together. I see the benefits of prototyping, but I also see where it falls short. Like it makes assumptions about certain parts of its process that clearly need more definition that I've seen through the experimentation last week with 15 people that we're still doing, that people need a little bit more, pardon the expression, meat on the bone to basically put their teeth into it. It's not quite there from a practical, applied, step-by-step approach. People just can't make the leap sometimes into doing experiments. Likewise, I've seen enough design sprints and virtual design sprints in the past 2 years to know that there's a need for market validation of ideas. And I was just on a call with someone this morning where they pointed this out, saying, you know, I love the GVDS and I love the community and I love the learning and the projects, but translating that to a corporation or an organization doesn't happen because they have their own agenda, they have their own incentives and so on. And if there's one thing I learned from a podcast before was usually people in leadership are driven by metrics and they're driven by politics. And the one thing that dances in that space is coming to the table with a win or coming to the table with market potential. And then people can kind of line up behind it or line up with it or line up against it. But that initial conversation has to happen for the design sprint to actually work, for it to actually have rationale, for it to be a setup for that. And I think doing the prototyping from that instance gives the design sprint process a bit more relevance and a bit more applied market value. Like you actually apply what you do to the market and make it work. So my whole theory with the dash, this new process that I'm working out, is that it takes the best of the design sprint process by Jake Knapp and John Saratsky and Brandon Horowitz. I said his last name wrong, I'm sorry. And Alberto Savoya's prototyping, and kind of marries the two together, but keeps it compact. And the idea is that people from the design thinking realm can venture into the market exploration desirability space with conventions that they're familiar with. Likewise, with people that are into startups and growth and everything else, can bridge what normally happens in design thinking, but makes sense for them. So it's going to take some back and forth and working with it to say what works and what doesn't. I've already scrapped a lot of what the design sprint process is. But what I'm starting to see is a way for both parties to kind of say, oh, I can actually test the market and see what happens before I even do like
each other.
Yeah, because then once you actually get that going, then you have all the rationale you need for that to really work in the market or to have potential to it. So that's why I'm playing right now.
So. Oh, you have an alarm going on there.
Your 20 minutes is up, bud.
Ah, that is what is. You're time boxing him.
You're hanging on is 2 minutes, then I start deducting time away from your next 20 minutes. So I'm keeping track now. Okay? And when you're done, just go downstairs and I'll make lunch for you in about 15 minutes, okay? This is part of the daily life when you're in a pandemic situation.
Of course.
So we have about 20 minutes left. So anything else you'd like to talk about? Because I like to, for people that have been kind of like tuning into this on Zoom and on YouTube, well, especially Zoom, for those that are hanging out, I'd like to bring a couple of them in just to get the perspective, but I want to make sure we cover everything you want to talk about first.
Yeah, maybe just one more thing. Just when you were talking about that, I just had an idea. Perhaps instead of us trying to redesign the GVDS, because you said that GVD5 will be the last one before we do a full reset on it. But instead of just us like discussing and thinking, would that be something that maybe in GVDS5, we have a few teams to redesign, like the challenge is redesign GVDS, and have participants and alumni from the community to figure out where they want this to go forward. I mean, in the end, we don't really have to take all the ideas, but I think it will be really great that if it's something that comes from the community itself.
I think it could be, I think instead of using a design sprint process for it, I think it's something where it's a combination of like asynchronous communication offline to have like a mural board where people can sound off, and we send it to everyone that was from GVDS 1 up to now and say like, so we put three major things, like three major pots on it, and they can basically go there and put their 2 cents. And then we have an hour-long open discussion on Zoom, maybe a couple of them, and basically discuss some of the themes that are there and getting a lot of perspective from the people that have spent time on this event. So I think that's probably a good discussion foundation to work with. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, but then in the end, we're still just getting a lot of feedbacks and discussions. So I kind of like the approach of design sprint where we can actually nail down the problems and finding tangible solution. And perhaps maybe not redesigning the whole design sprint, but having something, because I think one of the things that in GVDS is that the challenge that we have, most of the time we are not very familiar with them. And I think like because everyone is part of the GVDS, and that could be a really good challenge to even just do it. And perhaps it can be just thinking how to design the website in a way that could be a challenge. I just like the fact that like it's like the community is building the community itself instead of like you or me or someone, you know, just 1 or 2 people trying to organize this whole thing.
What I sense is that there's, okay, so let me explain the rationale for kind of saying that 5 is the last one. I sense that the maturity of this event is going to start producing some original works of like people are going to start doing their own thing, I guess is the best way to put it. You have the VDS Collective, which is something that this event inspired and that we have people that are putting their time and energy into. You have Life Sprint with Rakesh Kasturi. You have a couple of others that have kind of ventured into this space. There's this idea that people are taking some impressions that they have of this event and kind of casting it out in a way that makes sense to them. And GVDS On Air is something that kind of speaks to that. I think that if this event was more modular, meaning that it wasn't just every 6 months that I put it on and spent 3 months of 4 hours of sleep kind of getting it to work. I think, because that is a health concern. I mean,
yeah,
I was okay with it now, but last Wednesday I had a wall. I mean, I had a wall so hard that it reminded me of when I was a DJ. And it's a wall where you start to lose your memory and you can't remember simple things. And I know the feeling. I mean, I've done it so many times when I was in my 20s that I'm doing startups and stuff that I know what it feels like. And when I felt it, I was like, okay.
Oh, you mean 5 years ago?
Yeah, no, I wish that was the case, but I know that I can do it again, but that would be not addressing the reality that there could be a better way of doing it. And I think if I take this, what's done here, and I fragment it out in 3-month timeframes, it becomes a bit more manageable. It becomes smaller, but it also becomes more more agile, for lack of a better term. I think I can adjust faster to what people are wanting, and also create an environment where I empower people better than a one-off. It's a more continual conversation. So we're thinking every 3 months, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. So those kind of like the middle months. Or basically making it starting in March and then do a couple more events, do like maybe 3 times a year or something, but breaking it apart so that it's a bit more flexible. That's at least the initial idea.
What if a continuously year-long event that, but we only limited to, I don't know, maybe 2 teams or something.
See, here's the thing. This is the other idea that's been popping into my brain a bit. This 4 has, and the Manhattan Sprint project that Lee Duncan is speaking to this. And I gotta take a shout out to Juggernaut because he was the person that I first heard this from. The idea that a continuous project works, that it can work. I know that I forget his name. He does Strat UX. He did designing for the homeless all last year. But the problem was that it was a bit too loose for me. It was just phased, where people can go in and out, and there was no control over the narrative, from what I could tell. I didn't see any tangible outputs. But I sense that if there's a team that really gels, say like in February, hypothetically, they do their thing, and then the idea is that they set a goal to return in 3 months' time, but they passively work on it, gather more information, see where things go, and it becomes like a hobby or a side project. Then the next time they meet in 3 months, there's a different focus. There's a different emphasis. And that this team starts fostering a relationship that is more long-term than it was. Because I think it was Team Alana that stuck together in 6 months' time and wanted to kind of come back, or at least continue on. They didn't want it to end. So that impression that it had, and also with everything that's happening in 4, I just get the feeling that there's a continual conversation that happens, and if it dies out, it dies out. But what if I set a structure up so that there's a bridge between a 3-month time span of some type, between the February event and then something that happens in May, where you have a place, you're going to go on a bit of a journey, you're going to bring more people in, some people are going to fall out. So it's kind of like the band that had a major hit, but now the personnel has changed, but the lead singer is still there. Kind of the same thing. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because then it really starts to solidify the community aspect of this.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, take for example, Lisa Weinsberger. She drove the challenge that she had, and she assembled slightly different teams every week based on availability. But that was the power and the force of one individual who really felt compelled to put something on the table that she believed in. Now you take Lisa's example and think of Sabrina with the Kampala challenge, something that she did from GVDS 1.
Yeah, it's true.
That's like 1.5 years of focusing on this singular event. And then in 4, wrapping it up in the talent sprint and hearing nothing but like on social media, people talking about saying this is like something that was a major event for them. It became like purpose driven for that individual. Take those 2 examples and project it out to somebody else who feels very passionate or compelled to do something in the same vein. Can I provide a platform and an arrangement and a structure for them to continue that on? They have their offline life, they have their profession, they've got to pay the bills, they're going to do what they need to do. But this is something that provides them with that construct. And there's a fee to keep it going so that there's still me and maybe potentially other people kind of working out in the background, but it sustains it. And it becomes, and when it becomes time, they separate from what I'm doing, and it becomes like their own thing because they know enough and they feel confident enough to take it on. That would be much more meaningful for me if I could help with that, and I could help people get to that point, because not many people have that opportunity in their life, professional life.
True.
I know I didn't. So can I somehow, with the abilities that I have and setting this thing up, can I help people get to that point? Whether it's their own small business, whether it's their consulting, whether it's a nonprofit idea, whatever it may be, can I influence it in a positive way? So that's at least the thinking.
Just seeing the messages there. I think it has to do with the facilitator or the participants have a challenge that they feel actually very meaningful to them, that they can, that actually becomes their purpose in a way.
Yeah, but it takes some time for them to even realize what that is.
Yeah.
And what kind of brings them to it. And for some people, they may, like for me, you asked me 2 years ago, I would have been all about design sprints. Yay, design sprints, yay. But that was me. Now I'm different. I'm not as gung-ho. In fact, the Jake Knapp, John Zeratsky event that happened just like it was yesterday or 2 days ago, there was something really interesting that happened. So a while back, I sat in and watched a webinar, I think it was, with the people that created Scrum. I forget their names. I read the book. At the time, I was teaching Agile to my teams in Sabre, and SAFe had come around, which is Scaled Agile, and it was a play on their original intent, on the original book. When I saw that, and they're sitting back, they're near retirement, they're just kind of enjoying things. Their response was to come out with something where they tried to attach morals to their process. Like there's a moralistic way of kind of going about it, some values and ideals. And it was a head turner for a little bit, because I thought, when they were asked about these offshoots of their original plan, they went back to the script of, you really should do the old way of doing things, or to the original formula is still the thing that works best. And they didn't really understand or address it. They acknowledged it for what it was and the success it was, but they stuck to their script. And when I saw and heard the original authors of the book saying that the 5-day process is probably the recipe that works because it's proven, I had that same trigger. I was like, okay. And I understand why it was said, but when that happens, then I know that the original formula, the original intent of things has moved on beyond them. Virtual sprints, strategy sprints, all sorts of offshoots. I mean, it is now in the culture of designers. They know of it. It's no, for the most part, people are discovering now are in different, they're in different disciplines and organizations altogether. But it was a really, really interesting kind of like repeat of what I had heard based on the Agile experience. Now, we'll say one more thing, because I know I'm babbling again. Part of what I do in moving forward and changing things is not because I'm bored. It's because knowing that I'm evolving as a professional, well, as we all are. I don't remember where I heard it, but someone said, if you look back on yourself a year from now and you recognize that person, you haven't done enough. So my version in 2019, if I'm not a different person, bad or good, if I haven't learned from what I've done and advanced myself, then I'm doing myself and other people I know a disservice. That really 2021 should be a different me altogether. Not a bad change, but
hopefully not.
Yeah, no. I mean, if the more foreign that person seems, probably that's a good sign. I don't know. That's how I kind of always see things.
Right. I think we should save the chat in Zoom. There are lots of really valuable comments there, but I'm not fast enough to read them all.
Okay. So let's get into some of the ones that were said. So Andy Davis says, another big opportunity is to bring real world business dynamics into the sprint week. This would help participants to get out of the sprint bubble and more real business situations that really affect the course and decisions and outcomes. This can also create constraints that will test the team and possibly force them to course correct and learn more about the strengths and weaknesses of the activities. So I agree with that, but I think that in order for that to happen, you have to be positioned to basically influence those business dynamics. So sometimes it's leadership that needs to be part of it, but the sprints traditionally have been part of the project lifecycle, the overall product development lifecycle. I think people need to see examples of how that could work. Like there was one from HR where somebody took HR and design sprints and used metrics to move the needle in their corporation, but it took over 4 years. But they did it. But you need those examples to basically say, okay, we can do that. Take a look at that. And they can project it out and say where it can make sense. So I agree with Andy. But I think people need more examples to feel confident that they can put that in front of other people and make it work.
Yeah. And I think it also have to be in the right position of doing it too.
Yeah. Somebody like
So you can have like all the matrix and everything, but if you are in a position to show it or not is another question, right? Like who can you actually show it to? You can't just show it to you, the person sitting beside you, and they can impact that way. You know,
This is great.
like, it
Look at
doesn't
this.
work.
Yeah. And then you go out to lunch and you're just talking about how you can change the world. Meanwhile, you know,
Exactly.
your company is about to launch a major service that has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Americo wrote that, what about brand placement against services that support teams like one service as usertesting.com to support each team with 10 users on prototype validation? We believe for 5 landing pages for those who do pre and prototypes, Nielsen for 10 reviews with users for concept validation. Not top companies, as I mentioned, but the 11th of the market segment may be very interested into gain exposure. Was that a question or was that a statement of like a suggestion? So what about brand placement against services that support teams like one services usertesting.com? I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer it.
I think that's a suggestion.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Yes, Sirius wrote that there should also be an option for newbies to practice facilitation. It may not be a full sprint. It could be role playing. So that, stay tuned. That's coming this year. So this is going to be part of the whole mastery program. This is going to be coming. Probably starting in
also want to mention one thing, because I also get approached asking this question a lot, like where can they practice facilitation? And I don't know, like I actually, when I started, I actually create those opportunities myself. Like I just went out
But you're
there
a self-starter. I mean, the people who don't know, you literally like dove in straight first in the volcano and started swimming around going, ow, this burns, ow, this burns. But eventually you got to the point where you're just kind of like, yeah, it's facilitation. But that's your nature, that you just say like learn by doing. Other people kind of like, they want to tip their toe into the lava and not necessarily put their whole leg into it, going, that's going to singe my skin right off if I try doing that. So it depends on the nature of the person.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know, like the way that you can get better is just by practicing it, right? That you can read as many books as you can go to as many webinars as you can, but if you never practice it, you will never get better that way. You will only know the theory. So I don't know, whatever you can do to create opportunities to give like a facilitation, actually it's not that hard. Like if you can just like post on LinkedIn and say, I'm going to facilitate an LDJ or a 2-day mini version of design sprint, whatever you want to call it, give a challenge or something, and then ask people to join. There will always be people to join you, and you will get the opportunity. If you're still worried, you can always partner up with like a more experienced facilitator, but you can be the main facilitator and have this experienced facilitator as the co-facilitator, just to be there to back you up. So I don't know, to me, I mean, if you don't want to make it an open event on social media, you can always just like get a few people in your company. This is actually how I started. I just like went in my team and say, I want to facilitate this thing. Can I get your time for 1 hour? And that's how that was literally like my first facilitation experience. So yeah.
Yeah, there's an article I wrote called Getting Started with Design Sprints, and it speaks to exactly that. Getting practice, partnering up, like going through the motions. I mean, the analogy or the saying goes is that you can have a basketball that's signed by LeBron James, but there's no way you're playing like LeBron, even if you have the basketball. You literally have to go through the motions and do it. But yeah, that's coming. That's going to be part of like the practice, the role playing, the practice, the small stuff. Having those things available so that if you want to do it, you can, and giving people the ability to do it. Jerome asked me if what she would ask, if we would ask your wife how she looks back at your GVS4, what is her answer? So my wife is extremely patient, but she knows that she's also practical in that she's going to say, look, when you're spending a lot of time into this, and it could probably, there's other things you could do that could be more beneficial for your time and energy. I'm a part-time day trader, so there's that. I know it very well. I've been doing it for over a decade. I could go back to full-time work and doing UX, which I will not. I will fight that tooth and nail. But I have to provide options. So she's okay with me doing this, but there's going to be a time where I have to go, okay, does this make sense to do? So far it is. I'm enjoying it immensely, And I'm showing that there's like longevity in the whole thing. So we're good to go in that regard. Cool. Andy wrote, could we tailor a life sprint to help inform the participants' interest and position they could take in the GVDS event, understanding one's level of commitment to define their ideal outcomes? So that's a question for Rakesh potentially, because Rakesh is dealing with things that deal with personal and professional. I will tell you that when I do the coaching program, it's going to be exactly that. It's going to be understanding the individual first, figuring out what makes them tick, what their strengths are, what they want to emphasize, what they want to learn, and using that as a platform for figuring out what small incremental steps we can make based on their own time and availability and what they can bracket into their schedule, and start working on a narrative. And we keep track of that narrative to get them to, okay, well, now we're here, what makes sense to do? It's the whole thing that Kevin Hart says about levels, where if you hit a certain level, you just open up more levels. You just open up more opportunities once you get to that, but you can't see them until you get to that level. So that's the whole philosophy is that it's learn by doing, going through it, challenging yourself where it makes sense, and then going a little bit out of your comfort zone through events and other things and just practicing. And you'll figure out really quick if it's something you like to do or you don't. But having those conversations is going to be critical to having that happen. I'm looking back at other ones that are here. One issue with GVDS is simple. You see a lot of learnings with an incredible learning experience when one sees Robert's videos, but when the show is on the road, you land in a group where the facilitator is not exactly there for the same purpose. Can happen, yeah. There's always my hope around how this works, and then there's the reality of actually getting into the mix of like a dynamic group of people that have never met and seeing how that kind of pans out. But part of, Sandy, to your point, is how can we field that so people know what they're getting into when they about to choose a particular group, and they say, okay, here's Sabrina and here's how Sabrina does it, or me and how I go about it, or you, and having that being part of their chosen equation and how they do things, or how they sign up for stuff. Because people sometimes don't like my style, which is very execution driven. I'm like, go, 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 go. Then discuss. Discuss, then shoot, then discuss. Some people are really frazzled by it, but other times it's different. So I think we need to have that preset, like something that basically goes, okay, here's the one statement paragraph about this person and how they run things, and make that part of the decision equation.
I think it's also a little bit wrong, maybe not wrong, but a little misunderstanding perception that like you need to learn from the best facilitator, because to me, like it's not really like a better or worse facilitator per se. It's just different facilitation style. Of course, there are more experience and more some people who knows more tips and tricks and stuff like that. But in the end, it's really like the style that makes you click or not. That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah. I'll do a couple more. In our retros, we saw a clear desire to spend week one in research. Many teams do not dedicate enough time for research, largely because they are trying to respect each other's time and don't feel that they have the permission to spend equal amounts of time for research and design. That speaks to what we said earlier about spelling out the entire commitment of the entire event. Because originally I thought, okay, I'll bracket it just as like you spend 10 hours online, 10 hours offline. That's a minimal. That's the basic minimal. But what people, and again, it's a weird thing whether how I communicate. It's like you're going to take a disproportionate amount of time to do pre-work as well as what you do later on, especially if it extends out. And people just don't bracket the time. And will that change the perspective if they realize that it's a 3-week investment rather than a 1 week? And how do you prepare people to basically get involved and get their heads set with doing research? It's a tricky thing, because what I'm basically asking for is like am I asking for a 1 week commitment or a 3-week commitment, and pairing them up with people that have the same mindset? Because some people like Bart and Giost, who were facilitating a session, had their real work. They were doing like client work up until Friday, and everyone else was clamoring saying we can't do any research and everything else, but they weren't available. So it's kind of one of those things where it's a tricky situation. I'd love to do it, but you have to be sensitive to people's time constraints.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons that it's called a sprint is that because everything is really time boxed. So it's more or less meaning that we do what we can do in this amount of time. and meaning we could always we could have done better if we have more time, but we just have to be respectful of how much time commitment we can put in here.
Mm-hmm. Andy, the last thing I'll say is that Andy Peronian says, I recommend conducting open invite LDJs. I have been running them across Sodexo and include anyone who wants to attend. It has greatly improved my confidence in facilitation, establishing new networking project opportunities. Yeah, and people always, I can relate to that. So leading up to GVDS 3 as a feed to doing challenges, we did one for financial planning. We did one for creative leadership, where the teams were ready to go to do a sprint the next week. But I had to wait for a month and a half, and I lost momentum. People chose differently. So people signed up for the GVDS and said, well, where's my financial planning thing? But there wasn't an interest for it. So I agree with Andy that it is a way to practice, but it may also fuel, it may also set the team up for potentially doing work in a different stream altogether. It's LDJ, then maybe the dash, and then if you want to do more extended ones, then you just make a promise to meet at the quarterly, whatever it is. So it's you have that market rationale that you can play out over time that would say, oh, there actually is a reason why we should do this. And that completely fills out the brief, where you don't require someone to do that ahead of time, one person to put their perspective. You literally put the market desirability of what people are doing. The tricky thing is not everything is market driven. So sometimes it is a conversation about an intriguing idea that people don't really want to test. They just want to go through the motions and discover it. So, but I do agree with Andy that the LDJ is a perfect kind of conduit for bringing people in that don't know design thinking, but can try out different ideas. And maybe that in and of itself is okay. That was it. I was expecting a follow-up, but that's okay. Cool. Anything else, Sandy?
No, I think we covered most of the things on the chat as well. So,
yep. Although I'll be
excited to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, and Jerome goes, hey, your YouTube fan base online doubled now with my presence. Yes, we now have 3 concurrent users of the feed rather than just Jerome out there by himself or Mardea. We always have that foundation so that when there's 200 people there, you can go, I was here first, respect me, and ask my questions. So, kidding. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in to this version of Remotely Interesting for this week. If you do have any questions or follow-up, be sure to reach out to us. If you have any ideas or suggestions for future shows, please put those in the comments. You can contact us direct on LinkedIn. Sandy probably more so than me, because I have I don't know how I'm gonna chop through all the weeds with all the inquiry, but please do reach out to us and give us your thoughts and impressions. Sandy, as always, thank you very much for doing this with me. And please do a revision of your intro so that we can do this every week and get the reactions from the audience and see what people think.
Yeah, let me know what I don't know if everyone heard it, but let me know if you got any feedback on that introduction.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do it every week until we get it right, and then people get
yes.
Okay, on a scale 1 to 10, does this make you want to reach out to Sandy about
give us a number?
Yeah, get a number. We can do that ranking. 11.
Oh, 11.
And don't forget, if you don't know already, I'm pretty sure everyone on Zoom does. The GVDS Spotlight Awards ceremony is happening tomorrow, 10 o'clock Central Time. We have a new MVP. There's going to be a new one joining the ranks. We have a lot of people that have already put the Spotlight Awards out, so give you a taste of what to expect. But hopefully we'll see you then. Until then, enjoy the rest.
Or can they still put in their input?
They can still put in votes. They will make my life hell.
I
know some people have been putting in their awards really late, so I have to update the entire thing. And then now it's there's one person that now is on the best of the best and it wasn't. So if you have any last minute votes, please do put those in.
Next time we should do a meter, and we can see the scale going up and down.
Yeah, just do it then. It's who's deserving of an award, and then we'll have the usual, and then we'll have celebrity names, and it'll be fun.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Yeah,
looking forward to it.
Gotta get the input in. You got till noon tomorrow, but anyway, No, not noon tomorrow. What am I saying? It's at 10 o'clock. It'll be too late. I'll make it by the end of the day today. I'll send something out. So we'll work it out. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope the rest of your Thursday goes well, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye, Sandy. Bye, everybody. Bye, everyone on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you later.